This is us. Look how far we've come and all we've done. We've learned to cultivate our land, which has given us an abundance we've never known. We have harnessed the power of the earth, transforming raw materials into the energy and products that drive our world forward. We enable global travel, connecting the most distant corners of the planet, forging connections, and visit even the most remote places. Our innovations have led to safer, cleaner, and more efficient solutions, making our lives healthier, more sustainable, and more connected. And yes, there are challenges, but throughout history, it has always been the pioneers, the innovators, the visionaries among us who rise to the occasion to remind us of what we can achieve together. Yet there is still so much more to do. Our challenges are not isolated, neither are the solutions. We already have the knowledge, the technology, and the determination. It just takes the courage to look ahead and turn vision into action, to power our industry and society in ways that are accessible, affordable, and sustainable. To develop a comprehensive action plan to elevate competitiveness as a strategic priority in Europe. To implement growth models that are resilient and equitable. To invest in innovations that put people and the planet first. All it takes is the wisdom to learn from the past. All it takes is the willingness to collaborate, to understand different perspectives, to forge new pathways forward. All it takes is for leaders in our industry and across every sector to step up. All it takes is all of us. This is the power of action.
Good morning, everybody. And before we begin, we have some housekeeping remarks. The first one is, in case of emergency, please follow the indication given by the staff and the door marked with a sign exit. I think we are going to highlight those doors with a green, well, if you can see the green light. The other topic is, please switch off your mobile devices, and this session will be streamed and recorded. During the Q&A session after the debate, please raise your hand and a microphone will be on your way. I also need to remind all of us about the do's and the don'ts of EPCA. Compliance must be ensured at all times during this event and includes one-to-one discussion, but also any event held in the context of this annual meeting. So welcome to our 58th annual meeting of the European Petrochemical Association. Last year, the theme was collaboration. This year, we want to focus on action, with a particular focus on energy and material transition, affordability, and sustainability. The European chemical industry is transitioning very rapidly to respond to societal, customers, brand owners, shareholders' call for action. And we know that those changes are so big, so large, so global, that no one company, one organization, one country can solve them. So we will need to take action, we will need to cooperate, we will need to partner along and across the value chains in new ways. So I'm looking forward for the upcoming debate and the roundtable. In Europe, more specifically, I see the risk of missing investment, disindustrialization, and lack of innovation, which are all partially derived from overregulation. This is why we need to seize the opportunity of the new European Commission, new national government, to build on the Draghi report and on the Antwerp Declaration, which is calling for an industrial act along the Green Deal. EPCA has adjusted its own strategy to better serve you. We want to leverage the strengths of EPCA as an even more dynamic platform. We have today 650 companies. In this event today, we are very close to 3,000 delegates. This is the reason why, along with the supply chain and leadership committees, we have introduced a third pillar, net zero transition, focusing on decarbonization and sustainable practices in the value chain. This is also the reason why we are enlarging our membership to startups, recycling, sustainable companies. I would like also to thank our sponsors. Without you, sponsors, this event will not be possible. Particularly our gold sponsor, Chemical Market Analytics, Ovinto and S&P Global, our silver sponsors, Argus, Brenntag, ICIS, North Seaport, Port of Antwerp and Bruges, and TEPSA, and our bronze sponsor, Alberta Industrial Heartland and Chemical Specialties Singapore. And also to highlight all the media partners we have during this meeting. And finally, I want to send a very big thank you to the EPCA team. Johan and his very limited team, but also very effective. Your hard work all over the year, because really this event is only 1 week, but the work is spanning all the year, does not go unnoticed. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Pierre from Material Economics, a McKinsey company. Pierre, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to guide us through this first opening session. We'll give a bit of an address for the next 20 minutes or so, and then we have a panel that I'm very much looking forward to inviting onto stage. We have a lot of interesting topics to discuss, and perhaps if you look at the program for the rest of the day, this session we called Navigating Uncertainty. Guess what the next session is called? It's also called Navigating Uncertainty, and the other one is also about navigating. The one after is about finding our place. That's the titles of the next 4 sessions today. And it's something, it suggests an industry not lost at sea, but an industry that really needs to know where it's headed. And tomorrow, both of the sessions talks about transforming the industry. Another sign, perhaps, that we have some weighty issues to discuss as an industry. But before we look ahead, I wanted to take a moment to look in the rearview mirror. And this is just a chart of the total returns to shareholders of our industry in Europe and in the US and in Asia. And if you could cast your mind back the last 25 years, I'm sure you can remember many times when it has been said that the industry is really now in a crisis. We have problems. We have the financial crisis here. We have the COVID. We have loads of things. And yet, we've done pretty well, neck and neck with other regions. And in the face, I would argue, of some structural disadvantages, whether they are labor costs or energy costs. And of course, behind this anodyne graph is a lot of work, a lot of hard work, a lot of investment, a lot of innovation, a lot of ingenuity. And although the past is not a guide to the future, I nonetheless want us to have this in the back of our minds as I turn to start to talk about something a bit more challenging. Because it is probably the case that we are at the moment when things are more difficult than they've been, I think, for decades in the industry. And I'm not going to, in this next section here, I'm not going to belabor the point too much, but it's all too easy to come up with challenges of what lies ahead. We know that demand is depressed. We know that some of our input prices have risen pretty precipitously and at a structurally high level. And we know that there are structural changes in the industry as well, with overcapacity and changes to trade. Let me double click on each of these. Again, I'll try and move fast past this because I think it's stuff we all know. But on the demand, we have seen in the last 3, 4, 5 years quite a drop in demand across polyolefins. Got some examples of the vinyl chain here and several others. And of course, that mirrors what we see on the right-hand side here, which is that some European industries are struggling to keep growing and to keep producing. And now I should immediately say these are not forecasts. This is a scenario, and this is a pretty negative scenario. It is not to say this is what will happen forward. It is to say this is in the realm of things we need to consider, and we do have some challenging times ahead on the side of demand. When we talk about inputs, what's been on everyone's mind, of course, the last few years has been energy prices. And we were pretty used to natural gas prices below 20 euros per megawatt hour. And we now know that we need to attract new LNG supplies to Europe that will come at maybe 35 euros per megawatt hour. It's going to go up and down like that market always does. But on top of that, we have also said we're going to have a CO2 price in the European economy. And as that starts to hit, that price gets pushed higher. And we have high prices for burning fossil natural gas as we do in our industry. And on the CO2 price topic, there has been, despite the various crises of these last several years, there's been a determination to carry on transforming the European economy, and it is mirrored in expectations of CO2 prices that still are very high in a few years to come. And finally, then, on the structure of the industry, this is one view of how utilization of, say, in some of the key chains could develop. We do see overcapacity, and one of the reasons for that, of course, is that traditional demand sinks. China here, for a reason, are now pushing to put in place their own production systems to import less, to have more self-sufficiency. And that investment is happening, whether or not, I would say, there is underlying returns in it, much like we have seen in some other industries over some time. Now, at this point, it's also actually quite easy to criticize the picture. I've deliberately chosen some pretty stark facts here. And I would say you could say that the European cracker complexes share cost base with many others, with their oil prices anchored on that. You could say that this CO2 price is not just going to hit Europe, it's actually we're going to have import tariffs that make them possible, and so on and so forth. So you can nuance this picture a lot. And it's also worth noting that every time there's been a crisis, there's been a tendency to think it's going to last forever. And those of you, some of you in the room might even have memory stretching back to the early 1980s when a lot of capacity was closed down in Europe. And then only towards the late 1980s, we actually had a bit of a party in the industry, and the industry was doing very well again. So there have been cycles of deep crisis coming back again in the past. And I would argue that what has enabled it in the past is what we need to think about, to take away. One is that there has been structural change. There's been investment in new areas. There's been change in the asset footprint. There's been adaptation. But of course, it has been underwritten by competitiveness, that there is enough money available for that investment to happen. There need to be pockets where we can innovate, where we can find a competitive platform to stand on. And finally, there's always been a long-term vision so that you know where you're headed. And this is more important, I would say, than ever. The first two are on some level obvious. The third one maybe isn't. And I would say a lot of what we have wondered about the last few years is really what the future state of the industry should be, where we should be headed. And at that point, I need to therefore switch focus a little bit away from the sort of core financial and input and output metrics of the industry and towards sustainability. Because this is, I would argue, almost impossible to formulate a vision for the future without taking into account that there is a very strong determination translated into the types of CO2 prices and so on that we've seen in addressing the climate challenge in Europe. When the scientists are asked, they say even the incredibly ambitious targets that the European Union has set are not enough. They say we need to cut emissions faster. And of course, we see the effects of climate change already today. I think all of this is familiar, but it's worth reminding ourselves of because it sets a very asymmetric structure to what is coming. It is very difficult to see a future where this goes away. It just doesn't. And when we talk about the chemicals industry particularly, we need to remember that we have of the emissions that are released to air is something like 160 million tons, depending on how you count. But if you include the electricity upstream and so on, that's big. That's bigger than a lot of European countries. But there's an even bigger footprint in the carbon put into the products. Europe has said we're not going to landfill products anymore. The only thing you can do unless you recycle them is burn them. And this footprint has been forgotten. There's no policy support to change it today, but it may be coming. And that's what's on the right-hand side of this chart, to say, actually, we need the products to be built increasingly from circular materials, from bio-based materials, if we are going to have a climate-compatible industry. Now, at this point, you may be thinking, come on, first you said this industry is really suffering for a number of structural reasons. Now we're saying we have an even more challenging things to address. So it's tempting to say that we're just putting one weight on top of another until we all bog down. I would argue it's the opposite. That it is in this space that we need to search for the sources of renewal, where the investment can be, where Europe can compete without structural disadvantage, and where there are technologies where we actually might have a lead. And this is, if anywhere, the space we can replicate the past successes. So in order to put a bit of flesh on the bone on that one, I wanted to at least sketch one version of what that could look like. It's going to get a little bit technical, a little bit specific. The point is not that it is in detail right, but to show that there is, in fact, speaking of navigation, a path that we can chart through the uncertainty here, and some practical steps that can be taken. So let me go out on a limb a little bit and sketch what that might look like. When we started to think about this, we started from thinking about what could this feedstock be? And the first thing to note is that there isn't a lot of free feedstock lying around. You cannot go and claim lots of woody biomass or oily biomass and hope that it doesn't already have a use. They're in use by sectors with pretty high payment capability for heat and for power, for road transport and so on. So the first two here are pretty much in use, even if some of them are pretty large. But on the other hand, there is in fact quite a lot of waste feedstock in the economy that is currently not used, that is currently a burden via landfilling or is being incinerated with very little or almost no value. And that is available if we want to do this transition. Over to the right is just one characterization. On the previous slide, there were some quotes about hoping for 20% of the feedstock and chemicals to come from non-fossil sources. That's a huge ambition. A lot would have to be true for that to happen. But from a feedstock point of view, it is in fact feasible. It's just an illustration, but nonetheless, it is here. But if that is going to happen, we need to go away from this picture to some extent, or rather complement this picture. This is a picture of, a funny picture, but nonetheless of what the industry's core assets look like today. We have something like 70 million tons of feedstock, mostly naphtha, being used to produce 40 million tons of high-value chemicals. Release a lot of CO2 in the process. And in the meantime, there's a whole parallel system processing even larger million tons of waste being burnt or being landfilled, creating a burden. And if you're going to move away from this, one picture that we put together could look like something like this. Of course, we have a core cracker in here, but we are using oil from pyrolysis. We're using plastic waste as feedstock. And we're complementing that with a whole new train of syngas chemistry, where it's using both the off gases from the various pyrolysis and cracker units, but are also mobilizing new feedstock, especially gasifying municipal waste and other waste streams. Now, of course, we worked through the technical details here, and there's a lot to say about this picture. But I would say, first off, more and more we feel confident this is feasible. This is using technologies that have been demonstrated. It is relying on feedstock that is not already claimed and that you can get paid to use instead of pay for using. We also find, and I will substantiate this a little bit more in a minute, that it can be economically pretty attractive, all things told. It's not going to come at no cost. But then third, it is going to require an incredible amount of orchestration. If this is going to be possible, we need a change in regulatory settings. We're going to need lots of investment with new sources of capital. We're going to need a value chain that orchestrates in a completely different way to make it possible. But if we do it, we have addressed the climate challenge. We have found a new source of growth in new production using new feedstock. So there's a lot to be said for going in that direction. Again, the specificity of this needn't be exactly what we're talking about. But when we look at this, we in fact find that these routes can be competitive economically. The key here is, of course, that the waste is available for free, or you can be paid to take it, but also that the cost of conventional production is higher. And so, without delving too much into this, that is a picture that I at least would not have thought even 3 or 4 years ago would be the case. And more importantly, not on this page, is, of course, is this affordable for the society to go down this route? And here I think, no matter what product we look at, whether it's packaged goods, or we look at consumer durables, or we're looking in construction or anywhere else, we find that the end-use price increase is so small that it pales in comparison to what we've seen in the last few years in terms of prices. So we think it is affordable. But if it's going to be possible, then an awful lot will need to happen. The waste system needs to be turned into a feedstock system. Today we are dealing with municipal waste all over in little municipalities here, there, and everywhere. We need a regulatory level playing field so that what happened to, say, biogas, or what happened to bio-oils with the fuel sector hoovering them up doesn't happen once again. A lot of new infrastructure is required. There was a lot of electricity being used in the vision I just presented. I think that's true of regardless of your precise version of this. And there's an awful lot of other transport infrastructure and logistics needed. We're going to need new business model underlying it. And also, we're going to need, number 4 here, a lot of investment. We invested some more than 100 billion euros to build the current heart of the industry in the crackers and the surrounding infrastructure. It's not going to be the same amounts, but lots of investment needs to happen. That cannot happen with today's returns, with today's competitive situation. It is going to have to happen because there is additional money in the system. And that is where policy comes in, and that is where reserving some of the market for this solution comes in. That has worked. It has worked in power in the early stages when we drove the transformation there. It worked in sustainable fuels, where we built up a lot of production capacity, and it could work in chemicals if it is done right. And it doesn't have to come just from within the industry. A lot of this is modular. A lot of it could be invested by partners outside the industry to attract new capital. And then there's a need for intense value chain orchestration to close the loop here. And that goes from waste management companies to new technology providers to brands who will need to pay premiums in the early days of this, to policymakers putting in place the right framework, to many, many, many others working in consort. And it's a different ecosystem than we have today. And today's ecosystem was created over years and years, and we now need to do this immensely fast, so it will require an awful lot of leadership. But if we can get there, then maybe these things I talked about, the structural change, the competitiveness, and the long-term vision can be within reach. Maybe we can find a way to prolong asset lives and create local value. We can also make the structural change on the sustainability side with the emissions. The attractive economics will have to be there. It is marginal today, but it is getting there, and it can be done if we have the same treatment of this industry as we've had of other industries in the economy. So not asking for something outrageous here, and that can underpin investment. And this long-term vision then needs to encompass, I would say, more than just a vision of what assets are we going to have, how big will our companies be, what is the continuation of that return to shareholders chart. It needs to talk about other priorities for society. We know that we are going to need chemicals in the climate transition. We know that society as a base rate will need chemicals at all times. So although demand has gone down, the industry's future has a very strong foundation, but it needs to operate and address challenges like raw material security, to think through the precarious employment situation that we're seeing in parts of the continent, to address, as I said, environmental problems, and of course, also to continue to be a basis for future innovation. I'm going to stop there. I raced through this because I really want us to go over to talk to our panel, which I would like to welcome up on stage. So please join me. And our panel is of 4 industry leaders that are, I think will give a very rich perspective on these topics. So we have Jensen from Perstorp's CEO and president. We have Jensen from Evonik, who's president for Smart Materials. And we have Christian Kohlpainter, who's CEO of Brenntag. And we have René Hunlein, who is with ING and head of the energy section, but with a long experience in chemicals. So I will ask you to introduce yourselves and perhaps make a few introductory remarks. I threw up lots of balls. Feel free to catch whichever one you want, or throw up new ones. But I will ask you perhaps to start, and then we go through the round. Thank you.
Thank you, it works. Thank you. Thank you very much. A lot of food for thought in your presentation. A lot of what you're talking about is also what we're talking about in Perstorp at the moment. And let me just share a few specific Perstorp points. Sustainability, 2 points on that. Sustainability takes time, to state the obvious. And just to give a couple examples, is we've been on this journey for a long time, but it's taken a long time to get our polyol sales. We have around 20-25% of our polyol sales is what we call sustainable, taking time. We have this year got EcoVadis Platinum, which we're very happy about, but that's also not come easy. It also takes time. And we hope this year to have one of our sites to be CO2 neutral when it comes to Scope 1 and Scope 2. It all sounds very good, but it's taken a lot of time and a lot of effort. Staying on sustainability, even though sustainability for us in Perstorp is not really a function, it's more a mindset, it's a culture. And what we've done in Perstorp is that everybody is involved directly or indirectly in sustainability, and we do everything possible to continue to empower the organization to do what is right. It cannot be done central out of a function sitting somewhere, in this case here in Skåne, in Malmö. It needs to be out there where sites are. I'm glad you talked about recarbonization, because decarbonization obviously does not work for the chemical industry. I don't think we need to explain that, so I'm really happy that you mentioned that, Per. That's really good. And we talk a lot about raw materials and energy, which is all very good, but I think we should not forget water and waste in this case here, because without that, it's not going to work. And we have a term in Perstorp which is called finite material neutral, which is basically that we want to not use more than will be regenerated. Last point, and it's the last point, is because I might not be invited to EPCA after I said what I'm saying now, is that, but you use the phrase power of action, which is all good, but there's been a lot of action in the last 10, 20 years, and where have that brought us to? Are we more interested in innovation, and not just innovation in form of products and processes, but also anything from business model, organizational structure, culture, and everything else? We need a complete new thinking and mindset, in my view, and this is a huge leadership challenge, and also a huge interesting leadership challenge. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
So hopefully you can hear me as well, and I will also pick up a bit on the cultural topic. So Lauren Shelson, the president of our Smart Materials division at Evonik, and also the sponsor of our Circular Economy program. And the topic, navigating uncertainty, for me is perfect, right? This uncertainty is so intimidating. And we try to look at it from a cultural perspective, where we take this as more opportunity than that intimidating kind of panic feel that you're swimming under the wave instead of on top of the wave. And by taking a look at the different opportunities that are there, it's also really important you have a kind of clear vision where you're going with it, right? And from the Smart Materials division at Evonik, we look at ourselves as an enabler of not only a sustainable, but also a competitive industry. And we're not only focusing, let's say, on topics regarding pie oil and feedstock chains, but on carbon capture topics, on battery storage topics. And we have materials that have been used for a long time in these areas, and we also have materials that are being repurposed in these areas. So something that is a silica that's been used in tire for decades is now able to be used in carbon capture and storage, right? So it's certain types of material transformation that we need to enable. It's also an industry that needs to be enabled. And having a bit of a path as to where that's going, what role you play in that, is super important to not only get the culture right on how do we go after this challenge as a team, but also to motivate our employees to take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of us. So this uncertainty is super intimidating, but at the same time can be an impulse that we go after these topics as an industry, as a collective industry, and this future will surely be bright.
Thank you, Lauren. Christian.
Yeah, good morning. Christian Kohlpaintner, CEO of Brenntag. Brenntag will turn 150 years tomorrow. Tomorrow is the foundation date. It was October 9th, 1874, when a young entrepreneur with 26 years started a new company. And a company to survive 150 years, it takes a lot, as you can imagine, because the last 150 years have been, I would say, so volatile and so challenging that what we talk here is nothing. So my first recommendation to the industry is stop complaining. Do your homework and don't feel self-sorrow all the time. Might be a little bit provocative, but I believe we need to do as an industry clearly our homework. We cannot wait on politicians. We cannot wait on anybody else helping us. We have it in our own hands, as Brenntag has also shown for 150 years. That is thinking about new business models and how you actually set up your company, given all the uncertainty. And we can maybe talk later about a couple of examples of how we are tackling this. We are the world's largest distributor. And so we, of course, watch very carefully what the whole industry is doing globally and how we as a distributor and as a partner to that industry need to set us up to be also successful. So business models is extremely important. The other thing, and I frequently have talked about it, I'm 32 years in the industry, so I've seen a lot over the last 32 years, the ups and downs of the industry. The industry has always responded to this tremendous pressure from emerging players like in the Middle East or like of China. Now I would say the United States will probably be the most strongest player for the next decades, so we need to be cognizant of that. But the industry has always responded with a higher degree of specialization and with a higher degree of innovation. And I think this is also what we clearly have to have on our agenda and saying, how do we drive our industry into a more specialization and innovation area, including, of course, the CO2 topic as we have discussed it, but also when you talk about business models, circular business models. And here, chemical distribution at the end is just circularity reversed. And so we also need to think about what does that mean. Last but not least, coming to the topic of we need to do our homework. The European chemical industry, in my point of view, is overdue for a massive restructuring. And this massive restructuring is necessary. I mean, you shared the number, Per, 70% capacity utilization and lower. I learned yesterday that caustic soda producers in Europe have operated for 28 months with capacity utilization rates below 70%, around 70%. When I'm in China and talk to the colleagues there and talk about overcapacity in China, they look at me and saying, well, why don't you talk about your overcapacity? You in Europe have overcapacity, so what are you going to do about it? And I think we need to think as an industry, and this is make a little bit easy for me as a distributor, but I have spent 27 years on the manufacturing side of that business. We need to find a good way of rationalization. We need to take out capacity. We need to create really, really competitive players who can withstand the competitive pressure which will come out of the United States, which will come out of the Middle East, and which will come out of China. If we don't do that homework, I'm not very optimistic about the future of the industry. And this has many reasons why this is not happening. It's not an easy task, but we have to find a way to do this. Rationalization, consolidation, creating really players who are able to withstand that competitive pressure. Thank you.
Thank you. René, do you want to round us out as this intro part?
Happy to do so. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you all this morning. I said jokingly when preparing for the panel with my fellow panelists earlier, I'm just going to refer to all the smart statements made and leave it with that. But maybe as a couple of introductory remarks as well. Per introduced me as head of energy at ING, so I'm representing the banking side of things this morning. But over the past 20 years in my banking career, I've been in charge of large client relationships in the chemical industry in Germany and in the energy segment. So I know a little bit about molecules as well. I understand the charts that Per put on screen, how a facility of that scale works. In the past, you could have argued, why would somebody cover energy and chemicals simultaneously? There's actually no synergies in between that. turned out fairly quickly if you talk about CO2, if you talk about sustainability, if you talk about energy procurement and many other things in transformation overall. There's quite a lot of theme overlap. So that's why I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Now, putting a banker on a panel like this, you probably think, well, they put him here to explain to you guys how we could probably fund the transition, where the money is going to come from. Hopefully, we can cast the net a little bit wider. And interestingly enough, in the prep talk, Per also asked me on whether I can look at the theme of this morning from a glass half full perspective. Now, giving that task to the banker on the panel is obviously challenging, but I think, and also having heard what Christian just said, I think that's actually quite possible, because you can also look at it from the perspective of we're in a very intellectually demanding, exciting period at the moment. Innovation is going on all ends. The key question is, and when we talk about transition overall, we can, spend the entire morning talk about really large amounts of money to be spent. At the same time, and maybe we have time to discuss that today as well, we can also talk about smaller amounts of money to be spent, because innovation usually starts small, and the question is, how do you get things to take off the ground? Which role can the market participants play? Which roles can banks play? You also mentioned, Per, yourself, we're going to have other players stepping in. If we want to get the whole transition funded, it will not be just the banks, it will have to be the governments, it will have to be external investors. How do we make that story work? And then maybe to complement to what Lauren was saying, she said the uncertainty in the whole context right now is rather intimidating. I would even add to that and say not only the uncertainty, but also the complexity of the challenge is really demanding, because if I was a business leader like Christian at the moment, I would have all of a sudden to deal with many more stakeholders at the table, early stage, to get to a decision. I just said it myself. In the past, if you wanted to fund a project, you just go to a bank and get the money. Now you have external investors, you have the capital market, you have sustainability, NGOs monitoring you closely, and so on. So decision-taking has become ever more complex. So navigating that and taking long-term decisions in also politically rather fragile environment is quite a task. So I think we're well set up for an interesting panel this morning. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
No, thank you all, and I mean lots of themes, and I think that's and this is just to remind ourselves that there are lots more themes we could have thrown into this. We haven't talked about digital, we haven't talked about talent, we haven't talked about this. There's even more complexity we could add to this, but I was quite struck by one theme that came up here, which is what all of you mentioned now, was that one response must be in business models and in culture, and how we actually conduct ourselves as in the years to come. I just wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that. How given the setting we're now in, what is particularly important in piloting this? Anyone who wants to start?
I can start.
Yeah,
on the culture part and sustainability. I think it's when we go out and hire people, we have a bit of advantage right now because we have done a lot of sustainability, and that's one of the main reasons actually the people come in and work for Perstorp. But I think also is that we have a lot of young people who want to do well, but then only do well if they're empowered to do something. So the top-down, old-fashioned organizational structure will not work anymore, and that's for me why we have talked about innovation in organization and how the culture also, they need to be involved. That's for sure an important one.
Yeah, from my side on the culture part, I would say in the chemical industry, we're typically driven by a lot of efficiency, right? Getting it right, getting it efficient, getting it cost effective, getting it precise. I would say what we're in right now is messy. It's messy. We're dealing with systems that were developed linearly, and we're trying to now figure out how to make them circular without redesigning them, because if we wait until they're redesigned, we've missed, a decade or something like this. And so all of these solutions in the solution space that we're working in is messy. And I think as an industry, we're not really good at messy. And I would say that is something culturally that we need to find our way through, where it's not the perfect solution, but it's the kind of iterative process that needs to take for a transformation to take place again. Not the optimization we've done for the last decades. No, that's a different mindset.
It's an interesting question, I have to say, because what I learned with working with large organizations, that organizations hate one thing, and this is the lack of clarity. And when the organizations don't know in which direction you want to bring your company towards, and what is actually the top priority or what is high on your agenda, they get confused. And a confused organization is the worst which can happen to you. So I would say the ultimate task is to provide clarity to your people about which direction you're going to take. And we have been, I would say, sometimes quite directive, for instance, challenging our people and say, come up with 10 circular business models and show us and convince us as a board that we're willing to invest into that. Because we believe circularity is, also for Brenntag, a very, very important new endeavor we can explore and we need to explore. But providing that clarity where you want to head and what is necessary, I would say that's my number one recommendation. Provide clarity to your organization. Again, remove all the self-sorrow part. Just say, guys, the circumstances are as they are. And this is our solution. This is our recipe we want to apply. And then, you get the people behind you.
Maybe adding to the messy part, I mean, that links directly back to the innovation part as well. I mean, it basically means we need to, in terms of attitude, which people do you want to hire? You need to hire those people that take it as a positive, that you give them a long leash and let them try. That also, if I transfer that back to my job, that also means we need to have that very same willingness. If we as a bank wait for business models to be proven and that they work and generate the cash flow that pays back our loan, well, then there is, then I just have an administrative task, of collecting money and handing it out. So the question is, how do we actually make sure that we're doing it differently? At ING, we've done something by creating a separate business unit that we call sustainable value chains. And that's where we look at topics that do not fit into our traditional organizational structure. So usually when smaller innovative concepts come up, they fall in between the cracks. This is not the energy sector, this is not transport, this is not, something else. And then you just don't look at it also because maybe the amount is too small that shall be funded. So we created that unit and we're looking at all those, for example, plastic recycling projects that lead to pyrolysis oil being created, whatever. And then we fund those, obviously, with the mindset that out of 10 projects, 3 might go sour, maybe 8. But we're basically paying for our learning curve early on and think that in the end, we will also come out ahead in terms of know-how, understanding those innovations and so on. But that's a totally different mindset to being absolutely risk-off and trying to make sure that you, only hand out loans that are going to get paid back over time. And the same is in the actual operational businesses.
And I'm very keen to return to this topic of business models, because I think that, I think from what we're sort of seeing between the lines of what we're talking about is that they will need to be different. And Christian, you gave us a hint here in your beginning that you within Brenntag you've thought quite a lot about how this should change. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, I think those who are working with us, they heard probably about what we call the so-called triple strategy in our industrial chemicals distribution business. And that is that we have taken very decisive steps to create global toll gates where we can actually move products with the value chains and depending on where the markets are actually there. And also being able to use or utilize disparities we sometimes have in the markets. This is, for a truly global distributor like Brenntag of utmost importance. We are probably the only one who has, 40% business in Europe, 40% in North America, 10% in Asia, and 10% in Latin America. But that allows us to maintain supply to our customers no matter what. That was very crucial, for instance, in the pandemic, where certain markets were closed down. We could maintain supply to our customers because we found somewhere in the world, we found the stuff based on our long-term relationship we have with suppliers. So we want to very strongly strengthen that capability, being able to source globally and then bring it through those toll gates into the relevant markets, depending on the market conditions. And I always say, Brenntag needs to prepare itself like a fish to swim in salt water and in sweet water, because you can't predict what's going to happen. I would say if anybody of us will say the world in 5 years will look like X, Y, Z, I would say be cautious. In some of the predictions we have made 5 years ago, they're not there. And what we made 10 years ago, they're also not existing. So setting up a company to be able to address all eventualities of market changes, this creates resilience. And this is where I would ask the whole industry to think about, how do I create a resiliency in my business models, which allows me to actually survive changing market conditions, no matter how they will look like. Now it's a little bit easy for me to say that because we are not asset-based driven, so it's a little bit easier for our business model. But nevertheless, the principal thought: how do I actually create inherently a resilience in my business model? I think that's extremely, extremely important to survive the next 5, 10, 15 years, which will be not easy.
Yeah, maybe a comment from my side. It's not exactly a business model, but what I see taking place now in transformation is that it takes so many different stakeholders to make anything take place, that in the past it was always, yeah, okay, they're either my customer or my supplier or they're my competitor, and there's these kind of strict lines as how that relationship is. And I would say if we want to really transform, we need to figure out who's leading in which parts, partner up, make yourself a bit vulnerable on certain topics, because there's no way you can get through those negotiations and get through those sharing and exchanging of where value streams and where value will go without it. And so I would say it's not exactly a business model on whether we're licensing or we're taking an ownership view on thing, but it is, in my belief, the only way we get a transformation in the industry, and to get that kind of village together that manages that transformation in an understanding of where value flows and how important each member is to that group. So it's kind of like a business model.
Yeah, I mean, so there's so many strands to pull at here, but one thing that strikes me a lot is, of course, also you started mentioning the international dimension of this, Christian. And, I think this conversation necessarily in Berlin in 2024 looks quite different from Houston in 2024 or wherever we want to choose, right? You're all, I think, in companies that are active internationally, have asset footprints internationally, have ownership structures international. Now, how do you see this? Is there a big difference in the conversation? And if so, how do we chart a course within Europe, even if we are doing it in a slightly different way? I know this is a huge topic, but I think it's impossible not to address, right, in the midst of this. Anyone feel like starting?
I can start. I mean, yes, we have relatively more discussions in Europe. I mean, it's also the biggest part of our sales, but still taking that into consideration, we have a lot more discussions in Europe with our customers and good discussions. We also have discussions in US. In Asia, it's less. I mean, when we talk to some customers in India, they say, well, let's first talk about the other S before we talk about this S, about safety. So there's a completely different discussion you have with our customers out there. So there's for sure a difference.
Yeah. Any other reflections on Europe versus how other geographies?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we see the types of discussions regarding the carrot and the stick always, and we have discussions about whether a model in building up trade barriers or whether a model in pumping investment, how those types of models will work out. They're also not without its weaknesses or its challenges, and I would really implore the European market as a more cohesive market to come with what their role and how their position is in it. So we see a couple models left and right of us. For good or for bad, those models are there. And with the fragmentation of a European market, I think it's harder to get that cohesive model together where you can slap several 100 million people on one topic, or 1 billion for that matter. And I think that cohesiveness, and please do it our own way. No, it doesn't have to be either model, and it's one of the reasons why we're so thankful for a European market, is it's usually done in a different balance with a different perspective. But it's not forming as concrete as you can see it in other areas. So, I mean, I was last week in the US, we were opening a new facility in Charleston, in South Carolina, and it was about local for local production. And it was about incentivizing local for local. Good or bad, we can debate that on another maybe panel, but it's pretty clear what direction it's going in.
Discussions are indeed a little bit different, but you also need to see and face reality. The European industry is under tremendous pressure, not only the chemical industry, but in general. Because our basic principle, our business model, we have very successfully applied over the last decades, was actually manufacturing and exporting outside of Europe. Many areas, take automotive, you name it, we have it. And this business model just is challenged at this moment because we are, disadvantaged through energy costs. Europe is disadvantaged on the excess of raw materials. So I would say we need to very, very clearly understand that our business model, which has worked so well the last 30 years, is coming under threat. And we need to find the right answers. And in my discussions, I sometimes have the feeling the wake-up call has not reached anybody yet. And egos and self-pride and many things are avoiding that we have this very uncomfortable discussions of what the European industry, not only chemicals in general, needs to do to restore its competitiveness. And if we don't fix that topic, we will have social issues 5, 10, 15 years down the road, which will be very unpleasant. I'm not a doomsday colleague. I'm very optimistic in principle, but I think we sometimes need a little bit this wake-up call now. It's time, as you call it. What is it called? Power for action, or power to action.
Yeah, sorry.
Can I ask, what do you think the wake-up call should be, Christian?
Every change starts with recognizing that what has worked in the past is not working at this moment. And again, I'm not a doomsday guy, because we have seen so many things over the last decades, the ups and downs of the industry. And when I look at the Brenntag history, it's even worse, right? I mean, 150 years through those terrible wars and even the Cold War and everything which was there. Still, they were able to survive. But why were they able to survive? Because they recognized at some point of time, we need to refocus on what we are really good at. And I think this is what brings me back to the topic of providing clarity to your organization. Clearly define for your company, where are we really, really good at? And then ruthlessly drive that strength. I see organizations getting lost too much about, we need to fix this weakness, we need to fix that weakness. You can do this on the run. But what you really should do to have a discriminating strategy is saying, where are my key strengths? And then brutally play them. Brutally play them. And I think this is, it starts with recognizing that and analyzing that, and then commit yourself to say, these are my top 3 priorities where I want to drive my company towards, because it's built on the strengths we have.
Just one comment. Let's not forget there are pockets of very, very good companies in Europe, without mentioning any names here, who are doing extremely well. So I think also about trying to find out why is that. Is that due to the leadership? Is it due to the organization business model? It's not only the products, because sometimes the products are the same across various companies, doing well, not doing well. So I think also we need as an industry to learn from each other in that sense.
Yeah. And we have many missed opportunities. If I'm allowed to go back to the topic of innovation, because I believe a key recipe for the industry is what innovation can do for them and what is really needed. And again, I'm 32 years in the industry. I spent 28 years on the manufacturing side. Now I'm 5 years on the distribution side, and I'm puzzled, really puzzled, about the innovation which happens in a distributor like Brenntag. We have 80 application labs worldwide. We work with those smaller and smallest customers. You probably don't even know what their name is, or you wouldn't even talk to them. The average order size of our customers is about 4,000 euro per order. Nobody will pick up the phone in your organization for such a customer. But we work with them. We work with them every day. And they work in a highly, highly competitive environment. It's more a B2C character almost, the business we are serving. And there is a tremendous innovation capability at those small customers because they need just to survive. Just take the personal care companies who are developing new skincare products every day, the independents. And I tried to work with them when I was in Clariant. I could never make it happen. The language they were speaking, and us as a large company in Clariant, was we never could talk to them. And they didn't understand us, and we didn't understand them. In Brenntag, as we work every day with those small customers, we speak the language, and they have a very low barrier of entry to come to us and say, hey guys, my formulation doesn't work. Can I substitute product X by product Y? And can you help me, Brenntag, to make the formulation working? So we see every day, this immense innovation. And now comes my criticism. The what is created there as innovation and as knowledge, what are the trends, what's going on in the markets, rarely finds the way back to our suppliers. To help them, or at least to stimulate a new thought how they need to redirect their R&D to address really those markets' needs. Because they are typically, and again, I've worked 28 years on that manufacturing side. You look at the world through your asset base. Because you have your assets, you have the products you make, and this is your world. As Brenntag, we are actually representing every value chain you can imagine, from petrochemicals to food, to polymers, to inorganics, whatever. So we have a very horizontal view of what's going on, what are the trends. And what I criticize in our industry, and we are part of that, what I criticize in industry, there's no dialogue, very little dialogue, about what a large distributor like Brenntag, the largest in the world, sees as innovation trends in the markets they are serving, and what does it mean for the R&D programs at the large suppliers. And this is an underutilized opportunity when we say we need to shift towards more innovation, where I really would like to encourage all of us, start the dialogue with us about innovation.
We're happy to engage in that dialogue. So I would say that information would be obviously super helpful. It disappoints me, I guess, to a large extent that we're not using those dialogues. I mean, I started in the lab formulating, so and also for small and big customers, and there's definitely a role different players have, but we also try to make it crystal clear in big pictures where we're going. So between biotechnology, major platform for us, in the area of energy transformation and what pillars are behind that, and then also on circularity and what pillars are behind that. And I think that can already start to facilitate, these are the areas we're strong in. When you get feedback from the market in those areas, engage in dialogue. And then it's a cultural topic to learn, to just simply learn. And making sure that feedback is being taken in and sparking creativity and not putting on the defense where I didn't know that already, therefore it doesn't exist, but more on a cultural going, hey, yeah, that I can use, right? And I think that goes back to, again, the culture question on how we adapt and modify that over time, especially in a very uncertain picture.
Yeah, but one reflect. I mean, in conversations I've had recently on this, I mean, so a lot of people talk about boiling frog, right? And the notion being you have a frog in a pan of cold water, you heat it up gradually, and the frog doesn't notice. Whereas if you'd thrown a frog into that water, it would have jumped straight away, right? And so something that is it. And someone else I talked to used the metaphor of standing on an ice floe that is gradually melting, and not seeing that it's in the process, just waiting to the right moment to jump to the next one, right? But whatever sort of picture we have in our minds, I think we're all agreed that quite big and bold moves are going to be needed here. Both brave moves in recognizing some things that worked in the past that are no longer going to work, and of course investing in new opportunities. The key, what could unlock this, right? What is needed in addition to what we have in order to unlock those bigger, bolder moves? Because I think a key danger for the industry is waiting and carrying on waiting because of the complexity, because of the messiness, because of the uncertainty that we talked about. Any thoughts on what could unlock the next big moves?
I mean, you come from a country, a good example where there's two big moves that's happening right now, Northvolt and Green to Steel, and both of them very brave, going in there with a lot of enthusiasm, but also have some challenges at the same time. And I think also back to what we discussed earlier, is there need also to be awareness is that this is not plain sailing like a normal capex project in the chemical industry. This is very, very different thinking and risk profile you need to have when you go into that. But bold moves for sure is needed, and probably it can always come down to a few people, doesn't it? Who are prepared to go and start and kick it off.
Other thoughts? What would help?
Yeah, I'm reflecting on the point of how bad does it have to get before there's action, I guess, is the essence I'm picking up here. And I would say, I guess there's a positive also in that aspect, that if we've gotten this far and we have still our heads above water, we must have been doing something right in the past. And not to sit on that, that's not what I mean, but obviously there's a lot of basis to work from, right? I'm still amazed on a regular basis the types of approaches that we have in our labs. We have nearly 450 million that we spend every year on R&D. We have, not exactly the same distribution, but 30% in the Americas, 30% in Asia, and the remainder in Europe. We have a lot of innovation power. We have a lot of competence. I would say when it's uncertain and it's not crystal clear what the outcome is, and most likely it'll be 4 or 5 solutions. Electrification will go in this direction, and carbon capture will go to compensate where this is hard to abate, and all of these nuances. It's too easy to criticize. It's too easy to pull down the solutions than it is to build up. And I would also say that you need to have some thick skin. So as a non-native German living in Germany for a while, I built some thick skin to take feedback. And it's somehow that balance between, am I listening and am I learning? And do I still have a conviction, or have I changed it? And how do you adapt that along the way, right? And that's nuanced.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think it's completely right. We need to turn away from it's so bad we need to change towards seeing the opportunity. And both examples you mentioned, Ib, are actually not incumbent companies that even existed, but they were created in steel and in batteries in order to create an entirely new company, attracting new private capital. But the initiative didn't come from within the industry; it came entirely from the outside. Yeah. And that's the trick in mindset, I guess, then that needs to be replicated, right?
I think so, and with the risk of not becoming very popular here, but we had a bit of a discussion before we started. I think also it's about, in an industry, we need to be careful we don't become too male, pale, and stale. I mean, the question is, we all know it, in the industry, in chemicals, a lot of people, they're recycling from one company to another company. I think sometimes we need some new thinkers completely in from the right who come in and shake up things. I think that's for sure also needed. Easier said than done, and also impacts myself, but I think that is for sure one thing that is needed.
René, if I turn to you here, I mean, thinking about it, because ultimately, of course, if somebody wants to act, it has to be investable as well. I know what do you think is a sort of possible way forwards? Whether it doesn't have to be my sort of Lego picture here of what's happening, but it's clear that some new assets are going to be needed, that some investment in new businesses and business models are going to be needed. From a banker's perspective here, what lies ahead in order to make some of the moves we know need to happen investable?
I mean, first of all, we all need to look in the mirror and agree the numbers are going to be huge. So the transition is going to be enormous. And if you accept that fact, you realize that and we've been talking about that in this panel all the time, we're going to have to deviate from the previous approaches taken. In the past, business unit would come up with a new idea, you would build the project, do a test run, bring it to industrial scale, and at some point you would probably walk up to your treasury department and say, give me the money to now build in industrial scale. Doesn't work anymore like that these days. You're very early on engaging within the company on the actual business side with your finance people, and then try to stay well aligned. Why do you do that, and why do we strongly recommend that you do that? Well, because management task is going forward going to be to manage scarce resources, and you're going to have to find ways and hopefully also credible and understandable criteria on why you prioritize this project over another. And in order to be able to do that, you need to know which projects are coming, what they might cost, what's the risk profile, and so on and so forth. Because in the end, if we try to simplify it a little bit, think of the famous efficiency triangle from the investment theory, right? You can, have a risk-return profile of your choosing, of risk, you have return, but also the liquidity of your investment. You can usually only optimize 2 of those to the very best extent. If you bring that to the energy transition, you can also say, well, you can try to optimize to get the full scale of transformation done. You can optimize the cost, or you can optimize the speed of the transition. You will always only get 2 of those. Yeah? You can have it all and fast, but it will be super expensive. You will want to make it cheaper. Okay, then it might take longer. So in the end, you're all gonna, and if you transform it more to the industrial side of things, you're going to be in competition for actually the hardware, the assets. You're going to be in competition for planning resources, and you're going to be in competition for money. And being able to prioritize that in a proper way warrants very early on alignment. So having said that, once you do that, I think we're just going to add a bit more complexity by having early on more counterparts sitting at the table. It's not going to be just companies and banks trying to find the money, but we're going to bring in external investors. You're going to have joint venture partners and so on, which increases the complexity of finding alignment. But it's definitely investable and fundable if you approach it from that perspective for the big amounts. And as I mentioned earlier, we should also never forget that we should also fund the smaller amounts, the innovations that are coming up. But in principle, the system holds enough money to get the transition funded. It's just a question of what you optimize under which criteria and how gentlemen like Christian, like Laura, and like Ib prioritize then together with their teams.
Thank you very much. I fully agree. I think it's not a matter of lack of resources or money-wise or investment. I think it's available, right? It comes, to the topic, how to and where to. And despite all the challenges, I think we should not forget the enormous strengths we have. And what I said before, I firmly believe in. Identify the core strengths you have, and then brutally play them and brutally develop them. And we live under wonderful, political, stable conditions. Yes, we might not always like sometimes what they do, but it is very, very stable. We attract, obviously, immigrants from everywhere in the world who wants to live and work in Europe. So I would say it's an attractive area people want to get to. And that will, help us to infuse a lot of new ideas and creativity, which we need. We are built on a very strong educational system, not only in Germany, but all over Europe. I mean, the talents which are created by, I would say, at least the leading universities we have in Europe, there's no reason to not compete with anybody else worldwide as well. So we have that intellectual capacity. We have also the money, to be honest, to fund that transition. So despite the structural topics we have, and that is difficult homework we need to do, despite that structural adjustments, we can build on a lot of positive things we have here. And I think we should never forget this in this whole challenge we are facing at this moment. We can be extremely self-confident as well, based on the strengths we have.
I think if that's okay, I would open up for if anyone in the audience would like to ask the panel a question or ask them to elaborate on anything. So floor is yours, anyone. We have a question here. If you could have a microphone that way, please.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Diaz. I work at S&P Global. Thank you very much for a very interesting conversation. I think I had just these two conflicting views that I kind of heard. On the one side, there was an argument that we need a much closer collaboration. I think Lauren referred to it as village, really working together as an industry, but also with various stakeholders. But on the other side, there were sort of words said about a bold move by a few people or a bold action by sort of the leading market players, I would imagine. I guess I just wanted to ask if any of you could just elaborate more on the importance of collaboration and what are the trickiest elements in working, because I think we referred to that the industry is in a different place. We have a lot more stakeholders to address, including NGOs, the government, the regulators. What would be the most difficult challenges at this point of time in collaborating with all these stakeholders? And again, what role does an individual agency of a leading market player sort of, how important is it in leading that action? Thank you.
Yeah, okay, maybe from my side. So first, thank you for the question. And I would say as entire systems are transforming, that's why the ability to work together is so important, in the fact that it's not optimizing my one piece, my one contribution, but the entire system is moving. And it's actually outside of just the energy sector or just the chemical sector. It's actually the industrial sector. And I would say that in this aspect, knowing where engineering companies are going in terms of what type of energy infrastructure is being installed in places, and then also being able to put that piece of picture together as a specialty chemical company. I mean, my elements are usually relatively small, but they typically have a big impact. So when I hear, oh, pie oil is too messy to be able to recycle, I say, oh, that's my sweet spot. Now I clean that up for you, very cost efficient with some adsorbents or with some capabilities. But for me then to drive the bold change of pie oil as an additives player or is very, very difficult. But if this kind of roadmap starts to form, what we saw on one of your slides, and it's saying, hey, come on, this is feasible. And there's enough of the stakeholders in this room saying, I buy that as one route that we can place some effort on, then it's possible to go bolder in those topics and realize them by saying, okay, you start to get this general picture, a vision of what it looks like, although it will be kind of choppy to get there, you get that general vision together. And so this is, I guess, maybe the dichotomy between the one part of a contribution, but then the entire picture. But it's bigger than the chemical industry, it's bigger than energy itself, it's really about industries and how important industry is.
Yeah. Maybe one thought I want to share. We have spent a lot of time to understand what is actually the role of our company and in the whole industry. And in general, what is it at the end of the day? And the term was already used. It's about ecosystems, or economic ecosystems, let me call it that way. And we need to understand how ecosystems work. So I spent a lot of time trying to understand what makes ecosystems really successful. And I came to one point, what is typically, where every participant in an ecosystem needs to understand. An ecosystem only works if there's a shared success. And that shared success is determining whether the ecosystem is working or whether it collapses very quickly. Because if one player in an ecosystem tries to get it all for him or her, the ecosystem stops to function. If the ecosystem is actually, based on shared successes, and shared success means also monetary successes and profits, then it will work. And this is where I'm talking, I'm lacking a little bit the collaboration quality in our industry, which allows for shared success. Because we actually, living sometimes in quite some silos. And we don't understand that the whole industry is operating in a huge ecosystem where we need to understand what is our role as my company in such an ecosystem, and what do I need to do to successfully play that ecosystem. So I can only recommend to read a little bit about ecosystem theory. It's really, really interesting.
Just one example without going into too much detail. We had a project that failed because the partners we're working with did not feel they were partners. They felt they were suppliers. And of course, that's the whole thing, isn't it? When you have this, you need to be really sure before we go into all the legalities, is you really have the same aim and you're really partners. And you also have, as Christian saying, everybody have skin in the game.
I think there's more of a macro statement again, but roadmaps and ecosystems have one particular feature, and that's sort of like breathing animals, right? You're not going to be able to define it in black and white when you start off. And that's, I'm German, so we like our rules, right, and bureaucracy and all that stuff, but also from looking at the political framework we're being given, the regulatory framework we're being given, any of those stakeholders creating the framework for all of us to operate in should not believe that they can write down a black and white framework for how this transition is going to work. You need to have a little bit of breathing leeway in there. Otherwise, you're going to kill the innovation and the collaboration potential that's in there. I think that's, and sometimes when we talk to such stakeholders, that their intention and Christmas wish list is, I want to write it down in detail how this transition is going to work. Not going to happen. Yeah, you're going to kill the actual ecosystem and the innovation power that lies in the collaboration part. Easier said than done, but you need to have space.
Thank you all. I think that I think we have time for one or two more questions. So if someone else wants to question that, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for your valuable speech. My name is Cemil Çakar. I'm representing Carex Polymers based in Istanbul. We are a distribution company, 25 years old. and we are distributor of several European companies for the biopolymers. We have a big challenge in the market for the cost issue, and all our converter customers mainly exporting to the Europe markets. For growing the bioproducts, and I think we need some regulation supports and also brand owner supports in the market to more sizes. And you are more closer to authorities here, and maybe I would like to have your opinions, what you are thinking about that to be grow the volume of the bio-based products in the market. And second question to Rene, also the banks has a different policies and prioritizing for the bioproducts investments. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your question. We have at Evonik also a biotechnology platform, and I'm also amazed on a regular basis which types of technologies gravitate towards biotechnology, and which types of technologies still remain in a chemical synthesis route. And every few years we evaluate again, is it possible, is it more efficient, is it better to do it another way, right? When we start talking about the entire sustainability topic, there's always in every system pros and cons, right? But there's definitely, I would say, portfolios that are easier fits for biotechnology. So we often find this in life sciences. So we find this in development of materials. What we have been able to substitute a very traditional route of making betaines, so surfactants by rhamnolipids. This takes decade to develop and also another bit of time to scale it up, but is super cost efficient and also super performance wise, right? How much regulation has been around facilitating that? I would say relatively limited. Nah? Of course, people are looking for things that are circular in areas of life science. People are looking for things that are biodegradable, because we all know with life science and a lot of fast-moving goods, it typically goes down the drain. So it's then a water topic again, and we focus a lot about carbon, but water is an important topic. So I would say there are areas where it gravitates, and I think your question is saying I'm looking into a market using bio-based that would substitute something else, and I'm more expensive than that existing technology for that given performance, and how to initiate then a more legislative initiative for substitution there. And I would just say my experience up till now, our technical path for generating a molecule or a material has been gravitating towards where that is efficient and it fits, and it drives that performance on its own up till now. So maybe someone else has better experience where they have developed biotechnology and looked for governmental legislation.
Yeah.
I think that will come maybe when you get more legislation on either circular or bio-based content. And there are topics that are out there, and where it's looking for raising from packaging content 20% bio-based or circular, right? And then this would drive the need for it. At the end of the day, I think getting into the right cost position will make sure the 3 pillars of sustainability are met. So the people, planet, and profit, that always needs to hang together. And we heard triangles are hard. You usually get to optimize 2, but one falls out. That would then be the long-term perspective.
One thing I would like to add before René is answering the banking question. Actually, I believe we have that in place already. And this is the Scope 3 emissions. I mean, I'm a little bit less optimistic than you are that we can actually accomplish our goals of reducing the CO2 to the level we have committed ourselves to. And my anticipation is that politicians in 5 or 10 years down the road will basically kill those targets. We have to be rational. You see it already in the debate in the automotive industry. We are exiting the combustion engine by the year X, Y, Z, and whoops, all of a sudden that date comes closer and closer, and then governments are more than willing to just kill that regulation or at least postpone it. So nevertheless, the Scope 3 emissions is a really big topic. I mean, we need to decarbonize our value chain jointly. And our Scope 3 is what actually we buy from you as a distributor. You know it yourself. The only thing we can do at this moment, and this is working actually quite well, is that we offer to our customers alternatives based on the CO2 footprint they're buying from us. So if you have any chance to stop by at our booth at Brenntag, we show you the CO2 Explorer, where customers can immediately calculate what is the CO2 footprint of a certain product they buy from one of our locations to be shipped to their location. And this is process specific. And then you can offer bio-based material, which has a totally different CO2 footprint than it's a petrochemical produced product. And that, I believe, is a very strong framework we have, because we all are sitting in the same boat here. We need to reduce our Scope 3 emissions, otherwise we will greatly miss all of those targets. Although I believe long-term they will be a little bit shaky. But that's what I believe is already in place to some extent.
Yeah, let me pick up on the second part of the question. Thanks for that one. I think I elaborated on it a little bit earlier on. In principle, we like looking at new things, I would call it, and I think other banks need to adopt that approach as well. I called it also investing in a learning curve. I mean, we need to understand a new technology and so on. So, but in principle, we definitely look at projects like that. Second part of the response is that on a larger scale, as a bank, we've also committed ourselves to align our entire global lending book. So all the money that we're lending to all companies globally is aligned with the Paris 1.5 degree target. So there's a science-based approach behind it. We call it Terra. And we report that in our sustainability report. And there we show whether we have, over time, transformed our loan book towards the 1.5 degree target per sector. So it would be energy, it would be highly energy intensive, cement industry, transportation, and so on and so forth. And for, I believe, 7 out of 9 we're in a traffic light system on green right now. So we're definitely going in the right direction. Why am I saying that? Well, because financing a bio-based investment would obviously directly contribute to such a target setting of transforming our loan book. So there's also an internal incentive to, over time, more and more and more do rather such loans, or loans that are linked to particular sustainability KPIs and such, than conventional things. Whilst, of course, we also need to acknowledge that for not only a few years, but probably 1, 2, 3 decades, we also need to finance the conventional industry in their transformation. But such projects contribute to our target setting on the sustainability side as well.
I'm going to speed through one more. We had one more question here, but we're going to have to be quick for the replies. But so we wrap up on time. But I thought getting one more voice into the conversation would be great.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vaibhav. I'm working in Faber Group, Netherlands. Well, this is more like a comment, or rather a question. I think innovations also come from top. When I talk about top, it's basically the political framework or the European Parliament. What I've seen nowadays is every morning you wake up, there is some new regulations which is coming into the European Union. And I do believe these regulations helps you to be under control. But at the same time, what Lauren mentions, you are too much on the defense. And when you are too much on the defense, you can't innovate. Statistically speaking, if you look at in the last 7 years, how many unicorns have emerged out of EU? I think the last time I checked, France was on 7th or 8th list. European Union already missed a deadline of 3% of its GDP should be invested on the R&D, which is not happening right now. Do you think there is a high time that, I don't know, like industry leaders can form a joint consortium and tell or make a petition to the EU, like legislation is important, yeah, it really controls you, but at the same time we should innovate, because then it's going the other way around. So we have a lot of emerging economies which are following the same model, but the other way around. They innovate first and then they talk about decarbonization. So something you guys can shed some light on it, maybe. Thank you.
Anyone want to pick that up?
I mean, sorry, it's not to say it's done for sure not, but it has been kicked off by the Antwerp Declaration and now the Draghi report. That's the first step. And of course now the new EU Commission needs to get in place. But that's the first step, but there's a long way to go, but it is being kicked off.
Keep asking. about it, keep talking about it. It puts the pressure on that it gets more elevated to a topic, and that I think industry in general has to work with stakeholders that we haven't so much in the past. So regulation is always there, but dialogue on how to get it done. I would say it's more parties in the past, industry and legislation, rather than dialogue. And of course, everybody plays their role and has their position in it, but that dialogue I think is super important, and also to reflect on what kind of industry is necessary. I mean, I always take Singapore as an example. It's this small city state, right? And they still require 20-30% of their GDP they want based on industry, and they're selective about it, but they know what a role it plays in certain independence and with energy and so on and so forth. And I think that we get closer to this. Am I too optimistic? I don't know. I hear the discussions more often, so I encourage you to keep asking your left and right, your partners, your leaders left and right to have that discussion and to answer the question you exactly pose.
We are about to hit time. I just wanted to first, before we move on, thank you very much in the panel. A big applause for that. It's been a tremendously rich discussion. We need a vision, but we need to be credible. We need to have sustainability, but we need to have an industrial strategy. We need to deal with the complexity, and we need to collaborate. But let's roll up our sleeves, right? A bit of housekeeping, if we could show what happens next, please. Coffee break. There's going to be a coffee break. So that is available where you had breakfast. And then don't forget the rest of the program that happens during the day as well. I think the next session starts to help me here. There we go. After the coffee break, you have these to look forward to. So thank you very much for this opening session. It's been a pleasure, and hope you have a wonderful day here at EPCA.